All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's a Sunday evening. That means my beautiful Zulu mug is on your face. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty, and this is Liberty and Friends, where we wrap up your news week that was. Me, of course, being joined by the Friends panel. Now, I must be honest, the Friends panel today is a bit thin, to say the least, but nonetheless, it still is populated by great voices, guys who I think really are the creme de la creme when it comes to hearing alternative and analytical voices. Is that the expression? I got a bit tongue-tied there. The sort of voices that you won't hear on mainstream media. I'm talking, of course, about classical liberals, libertarians, conservative South African voices, and of course, even the occasional anarchist voice by way of Umpiake Gamine. Shout out to you, Piake, in the ether there. Hopefully we'll have you on the show once again. Once again, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Like any other show I have on this platform, I always request, please hit that like button. It's your only price of admission. Excuse me, is to hit that like button, whether you're watching this simulcast on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitter. And if you are watching on YouTube in particular, guys, help me grow my numbers even further. It's been a fantastic year so far. Baruch Hashem, thank you, God. We've just broken that 41,000 subscriber mark. Help me reach my goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year by subscribing to the YouTube channel. With that being said, also a reminder, we have a website. Find us, please, at bigdaddyliberty.com. There, you know, if you have a bit of cashola, I know times are tough, but anything between 50 to 100 Rand, 75 Rand a month is about the average that we do get from contributions, from people who watch the show. So consider subscribing and contributing to the show. Now, enough with that jibber jabber. How about we get our guest on and get tonight's conversation going? I did say it's a very slim pickings tonight, so what I'll actually do is open up the lines to you. Yes, that's right, dear viewer. Not only do you ordinarily get to participate via the comments that we flight on screen, tonight it is an open line. I want to hear from you on the various topics that we'll be discussing tonight. So what I'll do is keep an eye on the comment section of whatever platform you're watching, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Keep an eye on the comment section in the next 3 minutes or so, and I'll share a link there. That link brings you into the virtual studio. 2 rules, guys: no swearing, no profanity, and you've got to be on camera with a light in front of you so we can see your face. Let me repeat those 2 rules. No vulgar language, please, and you've got to be on camera. You've got to cam up and have a light in front of you so we can see your face. Make sure, of course, that no one else is sharing the Wi-Fi. Let's have a clean line tonight. Right. With that being said, he is hailing all the way from Pretoria, a business analyst by day, conservative analyst by evening. That didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. But nonetheless, a favorite on the show, Uthanda. Good evening, Baba.
Good evening, Sihle. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well, and I'm happy to be on the show.
Baba, good to have you on the show. And indeed, you know, in the here and now, you're going to be my only guest for this evening. So it should be Liberty and Friend tonight, no friends. But nonetheless, it's all good. Thanda, we're going to unpack here. Let me begin here, only because I've prepared infographics, or pardon me, I've prepared some file footage as to the chaos that has been playing itself out on the streets of in and around Wits University over this week. Many people almost having flashbacks to the Feast Must Fall, pardon me, era, where we saw students in this country really rise up in an uprising of sorts, and at times riotous behavior, disrupting communities around them on the issue, of course, of fees. And not only fees, funding for students. Now, if I take people people's memories, pardon me, back to that fees must fall era, the culmination of what became weeks of protest, weeks of riots by students across the country, led by certain student leaders, we'll get to them in a moment, was that President Zuma at the time made the announcement that education in this country is now free, or at least tertiary education is free. And I'm using inverted commas because basically all he meant was that NASFAS would now pay more money to students. Now, Thanda, with that history in the back of our minds, you would have expected, well, the issues of varsity then are sorted. If there's more funding and it's looking after students, why are we seeing VET students uprising like this?
Yeah. From what I've read, it appears that it concerns some older debt that maybe wasn't covered under the new regime that came in 2018. I think it was, where they started funding, the first years from then or something like that. So apparently it concerns people who had historical debt and are now being financially excluded from being able to actually get into university, which obviously brings a little bit of a question of how long they are taking to do their degrees, if they are still busy with it. Is it 5 years now? This is going to be the 6th year, actually, that since that announcement was made. But from what I hear, it concerns historical things, because the current NSFAS, when it does pay, it pays it's a grant, basically. It's not something to be paid back. It's a grant or bursary.
And again, I want to be clear here, because I know what happened in the comment section. I want to separate issues. Of course, the country needs a steady, reliable feeding through into the system, especially the workplace system, of highly qualified graduates, especially in the areas that are critically needed, in the STEM subjects, Thando, your science, technology, engineering, and maths. And where there are, as there are many, poor students who are unable to pay these fees, although they qualify academically, I have no problem with the state or private companies offering either bursary or loan schemes in order for students to make their way through the system. However, I'm also mindful of the following, and this is my personal view, and I'll get your take on this too, Thanda. This is a privilege. It's not a right. For as much as the Constitution says education is a right in this country, but the actual provision, taking money from taxpayers in order to fund students, the overwhelming majority of whom will likely become middle-class individuals because of the nature of the country's employment stats. I mean, only 9% of graduates in this country are unemployed versus 40% of the overall labor. So that data tells you already that students, proportionally speaking, are more likely to become employed and middle class, and therefore should not only on the one hand pay these loans back, but also be mindful that it's a privilege to take money from existing taxpayers in order for them to fund your student years, for you to then become a taxpayer, albeit it's a cycle, but it's still a privilege. Or maybe do you disagree with me and my assessment on that? Do you think it's a right? What's your view?
For me, it's definitely not a right. At the same time, though, it's all about how the country is constructed, and it's all about how the systems we have are constructed. So basically, when we put our kids through school, our schools basically exclude them having any other skills other than the ability to study, and their only real path to success is going to be one day making it into university and getting that degree and becoming part of that privileged group of people that are going to be able to actually get a job in South Africa. There's a dearth of avenues of people to say, okay, at least I know how to plant my own food, and I've got a backyard, a place somewhere where I can plant and eat. So even if I don't go to varsity, I'll still be able to eat and be okay. You understand? Those kind of skills people no longer have them as we did 100, 200 years ago. And so really the only path to making a decent living is this school to varsity to hopefully an employment in some job somewhere, and those jobs obviously there's an issue about them shrinking as well. So the issue here is the desperation, because if this path doesn't work, doesn't work out, what's the alternative? You know, you can say start a business. You know, people who are living in the township, a lot of people don't have money. So if you start a business, who's going to buy from you? People don't really have much money to be buying from other people. So it's really a question of this. They see what happens in varsity, and they see their life in varsity and their ability to get a qualification there as their only ticket decent life, because like there's a big gap in South Africa. It's got such an inequality that it's either you get to this middle class or you are like really down in the doldrums. You know, there's not like little levels that you can be in. Like, okay, if I don't make it here, at least I can do this and it will be okay. You understand? There's kind of a big gap. So I think from that perspective, that's where maybe we see why, maybe we understand why the reaction to these fees must fall or whatever is going on now. I don't know if it's been given a name. When we see those kind of things, there seems to be a lot of emotion around it, because it's kind of do or die, you know, for them. Some of these people are coming from rural areas where they're still, you know, either fetching water or, you know, there's one borehole in the middle of nowhere somewhere where they have to get something. So it's either you make it here or, you know, life is pretty much, going to be over. So I think so yes, I don't think it should be a right. It's definitely a privilege to some extent. But at the same time, we need to question, how is this country structured? Why is it structured in such a way that it's university or bust for so many people, as you just quoted the stats?
Yes, that last expression is critically important, because it also speaks to when you look at that desperation. Yes, that's such an apt way to describe what we're seeing. When you look at that desperation, one of the parts of the conversation that's always missing is, what about the hundreds of thousands of other young people who don't make it into university, let alone who don't make it to matric in this country, who sort of drop out after grade 9, because legally in this country, you are legally compelled to be in school up until grade 9. After grade 9, good luck. Hasta la vista and Chavez to you. The system loses you. The question I've always asked is, often the debate becomes so locked in on students. Oh, where's the money for students? We don't have money for accommodation, blah, 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 blah. But what about those young people in this country who are not in employment, education, or training? Where has the Department of Higher Education, for example, prioritized them? You speak of Thanda, for example, rightly so, the sort of hard skills, hand skills, we often use in the expression in Zulu, but are often desperately needed, and people are no longer learning. For example, why don't we have an army of welding schools, boiler making schools, electrician training centers, plumbers, millwrights, you name it. The very sort of skills which actually the South African economy, given where it pitches, is highly in favor of having much more of, versus a feminist dance theory, liberal degree major, like the sort of individuals who unfortunately you will see being a large proportion of those who are taken to the streets at the moment. Guys who are going to get degrees, finish a degree, and often sit at home. There will be that 9% of unemployed graduates who I talk of. There's a massive disconnect in this country, and the conversation often gets dominated by people who are in the, let's call it, with a pinch of salt, the student elite or the youth elite. Those who make it to universities, have the best grades, have the best shot in any event at entering the middle class. Now, Thanda, before we continue our conversation, I want to play some visuals. And before I even do that, let me do a bit of housekeeping. We're at that 15-minute mark of the show. The show might be a bit shorter. We'll probably only go for an hour, which means we'll wrap up in 45 minutes. This is Liberty and Friends. Apologies, dear viewer. I had a lot of cancellations from my other guests due to load shedding and a bit of illness. But I am joined tonight by Thanda Mabaso, who of course is a business analyst out in Pretoria, pardon me. You can find Utanda on his various social media. We'll have that information for you at the end of the show. As I mentioned on tonight's show, given the light panel load, you, dear viewer, can be a part of the panel. I've just put out that link in the comment section, so please scroll up and find it. 2 rules. You've got to be on camera. That is my one massive rule, and you've got to have a light in front of you so we can see your face. And of course, the second is no swearing, no profanity. I don't mind you disagreeing with me, but no swearing, no profanity, please. This is Liberty, and friends, welcome to it. Thanda, I want to play some visuals because, as I said, there is definitely some sympathy from me for the plight of poor students. Don't get me wrong. I've been a student before. I've seen fellow students literally rummage through a rubbish bin in order to get scrap meals from to eat in the evening. It's one of the things, for example, that prompted me when I was staying in Res to form a communal kitchen, something where people can voluntarily join me and cook up a storm. And of course, there'll be extra food, so to speak, for our more poorer students. And obviously, we never pitched it like that. We never said, come one, come all, poor students. No, it's just, Big Daddy's kitchen. Come on in and get yourself a plate. Because I recognize there are poorer students who bear a very massive emotional load of coming from poor homes, often those students being seen as the hope, if you will, for that family. So of course, I'm sympathetic to poor students, but there are certain entitlements here that are beginning to rear their ugly head in how other students who are protesting are behaving. Have a look at some of this riotous and thuggish behavior that we saw from VIT students, which really does undermine their message.
Hello, hey. Hello.
Yeah, ne? Again, images speak much louder at times than, well, often the expression is words, but really in this case, intentions. Here are students who want to be judged by their intentions being noble. Let's have more funding for students, let's have more loans that accommodate students, yada, yada, yada. But unfortunately, the actions here are speaking much louder. Here are students who, as I said, ran through the streets of Braamfontein, terrorizing small businesses in the area, intimidating workers. There was a frantic rush by businesses who shut their doors to stop the bullying by certain students. Of course, clashes on campus with security, with rocks being thrown at security, and really all-round thuggish behavior by what is meant to be the creme de la creme, if you will, of students fighting for this cause. Speaking about this particular cause, and I must play this particular video, and I want to, let me take a moment here to show this juxtaposition where to the media, and through the mainstream media, they'll show you the great side of this. They'll spin a story as they did during Fees Must Fall. Oh, this is fantastic. This is our generation of freedom fighters, they'll say. Support the students. Listen to their plight, they'll often say. And this is the kind of thing you'll see from the mainstream media. And I don't mind playing it myself, insofar as this is from the word of the SRC president as to what exactly this protest is about.
We asked for this thing last year, and the VETS management comes to us. Let's say, let us engage. We engage with them, but they're still not giving us anything, not even a compromise. Because they understand they must give us what we need to a compromise. So there is no compromise. Regarding students are unable to register. They are saying all of them must register, but there is no response. Yesterday we met with the dean. And the dean, we said to the dean, by 8 o'clock, can the VC give us the response? At 6 o'clock, Vets University sent out communication to students saying they must come, everything is normal. They must not worry about the protest. The protest will be handled by bouncers. That's what they said. They said they've employed more bouncers. And these bouncers, I heard that they are being paid 150,000 per hour. And that money can be used to register students.
Now, what about the rumors that as the SRC, you guys are actually sitting on money that is meant for students?
We are not sitting on money which is meant for students. For all students to register, we need roughly 33 million. As an SRC, we have fundraised 12 million. And we are saying we have done our part. We have fundraised and we were able to assist these students. Now we cannot assist any student, and no student can be left behind. Can the university do its part? It was Vets University turned 100 years, and they're doing a centenary celebration. They have fundraised 2.7 billion. So the university has money. This year we were told that we have surplus of 900 million, and we're asking them to absorb the 22 million which is outstanding.
So what are you doing with the 12 million that you have now?
We have already we have spent that money, all of it to students. Students received SMSs, emails confirming that they are funded by the SRC fund. I can even show you the email right now of a student saying, Apiwe, thank you very much for assisting us, but now we don't have any funds. The university must come and play its role.
Did you fund registration and accommodation?
We fund registration only. Yes.
Now the students who were sleeping in libraries, are they still?
They are still sleeping.
Yeah. Again, you might listen to that, and it all sounds reasonable. It all sounds reasonable for students to say, look, as an SRC, we've raised, half of the 22 million rand he cites as being needed to register all students who have historical debt. Because as Utanda rightly mentioned, there are students who have debt with the institution and are being precluded from registering in the new financial year, or rather in the new academic year, because they owe certain fees. Again, you might listen to something, Tanda, this is all reasonable, of course the university must dish out money in order to pay these students' way. In fact, the students said they demand this money. Tanda, have I lost you there for a moment?
No, yes, your picture just freezed up. Look, I saw a great comment that somebody put here on the comment section where they said they should really be marching to Lutuli House, or to be more towards marching to Lutuli House, or than the Union buildings. But the Union buildings is also not a bad place, because obviously we understand how these things work. We know that universities don't stream up the money that they want to have. Universities don't go and take out loans somewhere. They're not mandated to do any of that. So it's either they've got money that is being donated to them by businesses and private people, or it's money from the fees that students pay, or it's money that comes from government. And these universities are mainly government institutions. So they really need to be able to, the students need to understand where, that this is coming from, and put the pressure on the right people, put the pressure on the people that are actually going to be able to make a decision. Disrupting classes for other students, making other students, afraid, that sort of thing, it's really just barking up the wrong tree. And at the end of the day, you are giving yourself the wrong kind of PR at the end of the day. Because I think if the students were to march up to the Union buildings, or march up to Lutuli House, most South Africans would absolutely support that and say, yes, that's exactly where the decisions are being made, in the country. The structure that I speak of that doesn't give them any other avenue other than university or bust. Those are policies and decisions that are made in the Union buildings, that are made in the Lutuli House. You know what I mean? So I think that's really where I can say the lack of education is, for these students. And of course, it's young people being led by other young people, and maybe, I don't know, they may not fully understand all of these things. Also, and not to downplay the role that political parties in these protests, the role that they play. So I don't know which political party particularly leads the SRC of WITS, but if, for example, it is the ANC, SASCO, or something like that, then they would have a vested interest in not directing the students to the right place because they are obviously looking for positions in the youth league and as counselors somewhere in the future, so they don't want to ruffle the feathers of their parent organization, so they rather keep they rather keep the students just running around like headless chickens. I heard on another video they were shutting down a chicken licken or something. They were making a chicken licken ungovernable. So
gotta get their hands on that greasy chicken.
Yeah, so headless chicken and chicken licken, a lot of stuff like that's involved. So it's either that they're young and they don't know the right structures and they don't know the right places to go to, or there is a hidden hand behind that's basically keeping them away from putting the pressure on the right people for finding out where Bladen's and Monday's offices are and going and protesting there and that sort of thing.
Sorry about that. No, you're absolutely right. And I was just looking up some of those fees must fall leaders last time, if you remember, of course. And I did say at the beginning of the segment that we'll come back to this issue of the student leaders who often lead these particular protests that become violent. The likes of Shaira Kala, if you remember her, Nompendulo Mkacho is the other one. I'm trying to remember the Swati trap, Ugamini.
Yes, Ncebo
Dlamini, absolutely. And Vuyani Pambo. Where are they today? They literally grifted politically off of the plight of these students and now have plush member of parliament jobs at the moment. And again, there are students who back then, if you remember during that time, some of them were injured during that. Others maybe were still excluded anyway. There was millions upon millions of damage to these institutions, which makes me laugh when I then listen to this SRC president say, oh, the university has hired security, bouncers, he calls them, and the university is paying 150,000 Rand an hour for this security. Yes, of course it is, because it has an institutional memory from last time in 2013 with FISMA 4, where it had to pay millions, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of rands in damage. Those millions, which ironically come off of the fees of future students, making it more ironic, more expensive for students to access education in this country. It's this disconnect, which you rightly point out, Thanda, is ignorance at times by some of the students. Ignorance that is masked, or rather ignorance that is exploited by the political grifters. These political parties, the EFF Student Command, the South African Student Congress, which is an affiliate of the ANC, and of course other organizations which are broadly on the leftist scale of politics, which is often why you hear their language appropriate the idea of we're fighting the capitalist system that excludes students, yada, yada, yada. That's all a distraction. And unfortunately, and this is what I want to show the viewer, the behavior of the students becomes that of violence against other people who have nothing to do with this issue. And ironically, the very leftist students who appropriate the language of, oh, we're students from the working class, we're students who represent the working class. Indeed, the workers at WITS, or at least the union affiliated to some workers at WITS, came out at some point to say, we show solidarity, they said, with the students, because these students represent the working class. Tell me, how on earth can a student who represents the working class do this to a worker going to work and going about his workday? Watch this. That's assault. That's plain out thuggish assault. Some presumably Mr. D or debonair's delivery guy, some of the poorest people who work in our economy, assaulted by a student like that, a student who's looking for what? Tens of thousands of rand for him to enjoy his student years. And that's the person who they choose to attack. So again, I'm mindful of how this plays out in the public. We're often sold the image of freedom fighter students, but we're never shown this side of what some of these students get up to when they're entitled, or they believe at least they're entitled to get this money. Thanda, let me just take a moment here, excuse me, to say that we're at the 30-minute mark of tonight's show. Remember, it is an open line to you, dear viewer. You're welcome to join us. Please scroll up. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. Ribbit. You are welcome to join us tonight. I've shared the link to tonight's studio entrance, pardon me. All you need to do is make sure you have a light in front of you and, of course, a clear connection, and please, no profanity. What do you think about what you've seen in the last week from the students at WITS? Maybe you're someone who's affected by the violent, almost at times riotous behavior. And again, I don't want to cast all students with the same brush, but there is something to be said here about a general behavior in this country of, quote, rendering things ungovernable when you don't get your way. It is a culture, political culture, which was bequeathed to us by the various liberation movements, primarily the ANC. And it's a culture that endures today in democratic South Africa, where we're not just these students, but any protest you'll see where there's wanton disregard for human life or property or even shared spaces. Is this the way in which students should be embarking on this issue? And why, as Thanda has mentioned, are these students not going? Making the life of politicians uncomfortable versus making the lives of their fellow students uncomfortable. Why is it that politicians can waltz in and out of these student movements and even claim to stand with them when at the same time those politicians fail these students? That's the question I'm asking here tonight before we move on to the next topic. This is Liberty and Friends. Please hit that like button whilst you're at it. Thanda, I'm going to move us on. Because I think there are quite a few other issues, pardon me, there are quite a few, that ordering there is terrible. There are a few other issues that I want us to cover. Here's one that really got me a little annoyed this week. 22 Afghanistan citizens, let me put it on screen, literally muscling their way, in a sense, in inverted commas. I say muscling in with a pinch of salt, in the sense that, I'm smelling something burn, and it smells like a cable fire. All right, just give me a second here, Thanda, as I load this. Oh, that is bad. Sorry, folks, this is a live show, and I'm just a heavy smell of cable fire in my room. But nonetheless, as I said, court ruling in favor this week, Thanda, of 22 Afghan nationals, saying that Home Affairs must let them in the country and process their asylum applications. Now, let me clarify. I also wrongly reported this week that the court said they must be given asylum. That's not the case. The court's basically saying that these 22 Afghani men who are currently in Zimbabwe, as we hear, they've been straddling being between Zimbabwe and Zambia. And they entered Zimbabwe using tourist visas, by the way, and then suddenly decided when they got to Beitbridge, that's the border post between South Africa and Zimbabwe, that, oh no, they actually are asylum seekers and that South Africa must grant them asylum. Now, Home Affairs initially said, no, we're not going to do that because your application looks dodgy, but also equally, no, that is a proper smoke smell. Thanda, I'm going to let you take over here to give your views. I'm just going to be off camera for a second, but here's the question I have for you, Thanda. Your thoughts on this. Firstly, the number of countries you have to traverse from Afghanistan to here. Why South Africa?
Yeah, look, first of all, it seems obviously extremely suspicious. Why so many countries were skipped? I saw some of the list of the countries, and some of them were actually pretty stable countries that they, skipped through before they got to South Africa. And the second thing that happened, obviously, is that an NGO from the United States, or funded by the United States, decided to handle their case and fight for them in courts to be able to the department, demanding or requesting, I don't know exactly how the wording was, to allow them in South Africa, which begs the question why this American NGO didn't, offer to give them asylum in the United States, but be that as it may. So for me, it just brings home a topic that, I think about often in South Africa. South Africa, has a constitution which we are told and is described to us as being, the one of the best constitutions in the world. It's excellent and it does so many things. But sometimes I think our constitution is misaligned to the stage of development that our country is in. Sometimes I call it a very expensive constitution. Just as an example, we had a discussion in a previous show that I was in here, in Big Daddy Liberty, where we discussed the Limpopo MEC, who was talking about foreigners coming in and using up the resources, using up the resources of the hospitals in South Africa. And that, and that was because in our constitution, it says that anybody who is in South Africa has a right to health. Not any citizen of South Africa has the right to health. Anyone who's in South Africa has a right to that. So long as you can get in South Africa, how you got in, why you got in, you have a right to healthcare. They can of course, give you a bill afterwards. But then once you return to your country, you never have to worry about paying that bill again. And when you come back in, you can go through that process again, and you have to be allowed. So that's the constitution South Africa has. It sounds beautiful, and maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe it's good to be able to be a good Samaritan like that. But do we have the money to be able to fund that kind of provision in the constitution? Is the constitution not maybe too expensive for where South Africa is right now and the priorities it should be having right now? So now here again, this NGO was successful in courts. Now some people are saying, read somewhere, some people were blaming the judges or something like that. I think the judges are professional people. They want to do their job well. They read the laws, they read the constitution, and they make an interpretation based on that. Like sometimes maybe there might be a bit of activism, or there might be something else going on. But most of the time, I think judgments that are made in South Africa, judges are trying to make judgments according to how they understand the constitution to be written. Do we maybe need to revisit this? Do we need to maybe rein it back just a little bit so that we have a chance as a country to start focusing on the key development issues within our country, without trying to be Father Christmas, without trying to be, the most beautiful sound, nation in the world that embraces everyone and everything, at the expense of, limited tax funds, at the expense of the cultural, and moral inclinations of the average South African. We had, for example, the ruling on corporal punishment, where the Chief Justice said, you know what, me personally, I'm a Christian. That was Chief Mogoeng at the time. I believe in corporal punishment, but I had to make a judgment according to the Constitution. And according to the Constitution, I had to say, you can't spank your child. So I think it, we'll always have little incidents like this where it seems like our country is being, forced to do things that don't make sense, so long as we don't admit that our Constitution is maybe not as perfect as we'd like to believe, and that there needs to be some revisiting.
I mean, on this particular issue, there's a few questions I asked this week, Thanda, on Ivuganazo, the morning news analysis show. And I said, no, I don't have a problem generally speaking, insofar as our overall immigration law. I don't have a problem that there is a section for asylum seekers. I don't have a problem with that. Look, it's okay. Where I do have a problem is the abuse of the system, as is reflected in how the Department of Home Affairs also approached this issue. Indeed, Armut Oledi saying as much as the Minister of Home Affairs, that when it comes to these particular 22 individuals, there are a lot of red flags. Why, for instance, traverse so many countries between Afghanistan and South Africa? Other countries, by the way, which would have been able to offer asylum much better, much safer asylum, if you will, than South Africa. For instance, countries where they would have spoken a language closer to these 22 Afghani citizens. Turkey, for example, is a good example. Why bypass all those countries and insist on being in South Africa and then literally approach the courts, which is their right, I suppose, by that same constitution you mentioned. But it just raised a lot of security issues, I think, around this issue, where you, for example, cite the inability of South Africa to, given its limited resources, to handle, for example, on healthcare, education, the influx of asylum seekers in this country who wait often years in their applications. But the other issue I've cited, at least from the show, is the security element. Does South Africa have the means? I think I'm frozen on screen here. I don't know if I'm okay. There I'm back. Does South Africa have the means at a security level to make sure that these 22 men, for example, are not being actively hunted by the Taliban, or maybe that they themselves are not part of the terrorist organization, the Taliban? These are the sort of issues which, again, I thought raised red flags when I saw the desperation for these men to enter.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's all about can you, it's all good and well to have a great constitution. We had a scenario, and other people may disagree with me on this. The Al-Bashir issue, where he came into South Africa for a conference. I believe they shouldn't have allowed him in, knowing that they were signatories, to the treaty. But be that as it may, he did get in the country to attend some sort of Africa summit, or whatever it was, AU, whatever a meeting it was. And then, of course, it was brought up that, wait, this guy, there's an arrest warrant on him. South Africa should be arresting him. And at the time, and obviously the judgment went that way, but he was spirited away out of South Africa, before that judgment could be made, or just afterwards. I can't quite remember. So the thing I thought about at the time is, how does it make sense to arrest a sitting president of a country and especially a country that is within the region? It's not too far, and potentially firing up not just a diplomatic role, but potentially a military role. Most countries that are self-respecting, if their head of state gets held captive in a country, would action a military campaign to get their president back. And I thought, and of course, that seems to not bother the courts at all. All they worried about was the letter of the law that said, you signed up to this, therefore you must do it. Whether or not it leads to a war is irrelevant to us. And so I think it's just those types of things for me that worry me, that says, yes, they have every right to approach our courts. We're not saying they don't. Obviously, it's a bit suspicious that it's an American NGO that decided to fund this. As I joked, I wonder why they didn't fund them to go to the US, but maybe these guys were very specific that they needed to be in South Africa for whatever reason that they're not telling us, which now apparently is that they want to help people. But the question is, why is it to not take into account practical circumstances of, do we have the funding for this? Do we have the, would it make sense from a security perspective? We're talking about security now. Would it have made sense to arrest a sitting president and potentially put the country at risk of a military attack? Those types of things don't seem to matter to our judges. And again, maybe I can't blame them. Maybe it's because they are just interpreting the Constitution as it is, and that just needs to be revisited by us so that it becomes, we can always get there. It's a goal. We would love to be able to get to a place where we can play Father Christmas. I'd love to be able to get to a place where we can help as many Zimbabweans that need to come to South Africa and work and do whatever they want. I'd love to be able to do that because those are human beings. They're not coming here because they just feel like it. They'd also love to be in their own countries, but they're coming out of desperation. But we've got to take step by step. We first have to get right as a country before we start, trying to show the world, become a popular person in the world, accepting that or not.
Thanda, I lost you there for the last sort of 2 seconds of that, but I definitely got the sentiment. And I'm just looking at time. Maybe as a final thought on this one, I'm just very concerned about where South Africa is right now, generally speaking, on the issue of our border security or the lack thereof. Here we have a country, Thanda, where the news headlines are beginning to pop up around this country is now being used by international syndicates, international criminal and terrorist syndicates as a base, from the likes of Al-Shabaab to these terrorist scum that are busy in Mozambique at the moment.
As well,
Al-Qaeda,
yes,
and the like.
Yeah.
They're using South Africa as not only a hub for training, but also funding in particular for these activities. And that is deeply troubling. And that's why I think for a lot of South Africans, this issue registered on a personal unease level. Nothing against Afghanis as people. Afghanis actually, if anything, are facing a serious problem there of the Taliban. You could be a relatively law-abiding, peaceful kind of guy wanting to live your life there. And here are these, religious fanatics, with a fundamentally radical Islamic terrorist ideology wanting to disrupt your life. So I get it, right? There are people, of course, who don't want to be a part of that. But unfortunately, South Africa doesn't have the capacity, in my view, and in the general view of things, given our poor border security, to handle this. Your final thoughts before we move on?
No, absolutely right. Absolutely right. It has been very concerning, the security situation in South Africa. Obviously, since crime was mostly an internal thing. People stealing from within South Africa, South Africans stealing from South Africans, and that sort of thing. But there has been a noticeable shift in the crime in South Africa, where it's starting to take certain nationalities in. So now we have prostitution and drugs being run by, mainly Nigerian syndicates. I think recently there was a bust that was done by the FBI, also Interpol or something in South Africa for a Nigerian, sort of syndicate. And then you've got, carjackings being done by Mozambicans. Certain robberies and sort of done by Zimbabweans. We've had the mines, what are they called? Illegal mines by the guys from Lesotho.
That's right,
Mazama. So we're starting to see formations of other countries, coming in and finding a way to organize themselves. Bedford View, of course, and the people from Eastern Europe, that are gangsters there from Eastern Europe. So we're just starting to see formations in South Africa of people coming in and forming criminal organizations, and it's becoming very concerning. The kidnappings, the kidnappings of Indian and Muslim businessmen by people linked with Pakistan and that sort of stuff. So it's huge. South Africa is really in a dire situation at the moment. I don't think the government and powers that be even know exactly, can even give an actual accounting of what's going on in South Africa, and that is very concerning.
As you say in Zulu, Gubi, and indeed the situation is looking bad, and it's very concerning because we then have a situation where we have a useless and hapless police minister, almost non-existent at the moment, given that it was absorbed into the presidency, state security agency. And these agencies of law enforcement are clearly not doing their job, or at the very least not doing enough to stem the security crisis that we're facing. We'll keep an eye on this particular story, of course. The latest I heard, the attorney of these 22 Afghani citizens indicating, given the noise and the uproar in the South African public sphere, maybe these men, he says, should look for asylum elsewhere, and maybe that might be. Excuse me, I'm choking on the smoke, and it's not even anywhere around me. There could be a fire in the area. But yeah, nonetheless, let's move on. You know, the other issue here is it brings me to a one President Cyril Ramaphosa. You know, Cyril Ramaphosa was this week's momish of the week on Vuganazo for comments that he made, Thanda, where he basically suggested in a responding affidavit. Now, the UDM and about 16 other various groupings and parties are taking this government, the Cyril Ramaphosa government, to court. And they're arguing that actually the government is breaking its constitutional duty to provide electricity by the constant load shedding and the deeper levels of load shedding. So they're taking government to court to basically have them declared their bad response and the current load shedding unconstitutional. Now, I don't argue the merits of this particular case. It's irrelevant for me for now. What I found interesting was the response of Cyril Ramaphosa, basically saying in his affidavit, oh no, he said, electricity and the provision of electricity is actually not the responsibility of government or the three spheres of government, as he says. No. Don't blame us, he suggests, because Eskom is a separate entity. Therefore, you can't blame any of the three entities of government. It's that sort of political dribble, sophistry, nonsense, if you will, Thanda, that annoys South Africans who clearly see they're being dribbled here. And it's the reason why I called him Imumish of the week. Your quick thoughts on this before we talk about his proposed cabinet reshuffle?
All right. In 2005, I was employed for the first time, and it was a small accounting firm. And I, from time to time, I had issues, VAT issues to sort out for clients that I had to call SARS. And I would call SARS and they'll tell me, no, we cannot sort it out here in the call center. You're going to have to go to the branch, to get it sorted out. You have to go and visit a branch. So I'd go and visit a SARS branch. When I get to the SARS branch would say, no, unfortunately, we can't solve these kinds of issues. You have to go and, try and call the call center. So I remember calling the call center and they were about to tell me the same thing, like try and call this person or that person. I said, no, I'm not calling anybody else. You have to help me today. So I think it's that experience that one has with government where nobody really, when the bureaucracy becomes so complicated, and it becomes so big, we have these discussions about what are the issues, statism, and what's the issues with the state and stuff like that. Sometimes it's these complicated bureaucracies where everybody's able to escape, accountability for something, because fair enough, he actually cites sections in the Constitution that show electricity. I think section 4, whatever it's on the Constitution. But of course, if you go to a municipality and say, why aren't you providing electricity? They'll say, electricity is given to us by Eskom. And Eskom is it's a national, it's sitting in a national Department of Enterprises or Mining or Energy or Minister of Electricity, whoever is now in charge of Eskom. So it's just this ability to deny any kind of responsibility. And I think for me, the big thing that I talk about when I talk about this electricity crisis is actually how it's hurting South Africa's perspective on electricity in South Africa. We are now looking for the bare minimum. We just want the lights on. If we can have a few months of just having the lights on, we'll be happy. South Africa actually needs to be generating at least 4 times the electricity it's currently generating. Its current capacity. Not even say what its capacity is right now. It needs to be generating 4 times that capacity. If South Africa is to have the growth that it needs to be able to arrest and reverse the unemployment rate and get everybody employed. South Africa should be highly industrializing themselves. They should be highly industrializing in rural areas, for example, setting up infrastructure there and setting up industries there so that people can be working in, within those rural areas. And of course, for that to happen, you need electricity, and electricity needs to be getting produced. It's really, we shouldn't be talking about this payment. We shouldn't be talking about Kusile and what's that, Medupi. There should be 5 other projects that are, big projects, whether it's nuclear or coal or whatever it is, that are being done and completed to bring in a huge amount of electricity in South Africa if we had a government that was serious about actually employing, its people. I know you want to jump after this into talking about, I can't remember what you said now, but
for the reshuffle,
actually
that
the
is being
reshuffle.
proposed.
But before we get into that, there was also a topic you mentioned about informal settlements, and that speaks.
No, we'll get to that.
Yes,
that's the final topic for the evening.
Yes, that's actually very connected to this, because there's the lack of development and the lack of infrastructure investment. Eskom being the biggest example, but Transnet as well has fallen apart. The lack of investment in these kinds of vehicles that can actually bring development into rural areas is what gets people, leaving these areas and flooding, cities. In order to, literally for 30 years, there's been no investment in expanding South Africa. There's been a big push towards inclusion rather than actually a push towards expansion. But be that as it may, that's my view on this. We'll get maybe more into that, but my view on this is it's really the load shedding crisis has done a terrible disservice to the way we are talking about electricity in South Africa, because we're just talking now about how to get the bare minimum of electricity, when actually what we should be talking about is why we're not producing 4 or 5 times the electricity that we are now.
Absolutely. And again, how can we even have that conversation when we have this sort of political leadership in this country? And again, it doesn't just solely rest on them, but it does in the sense of they will marshal state power. They will marshal the coercive, manipulative state power in order to hold on to a monopoly. That monopoly then becomes a single point of failure, because of that monopoly, for whatever reason, as was the case under stage 6, in inverted commas, stage 6, actually this country reached as much as stage 8, but we will cross that bridge another day, where over half the generation of Eskom was not available to it. And that's when they started lying and saying it was stage 6. That wasn't stage 6. We came very close to the precipice in this country, and it's not going to get better. This is where it gets annoying for me, Thanda, because here's a government that insists on being the sole provider of something that they do not provide, but which equally the politicians of that same government exploits the very thing that they're not providing the service of. There are politicians and politically elite individuals who are becoming rather fat and wealthy off of the failure of Eskom, which still has to do the BEE thing of contracting to the so-called historically disadvantaged, who then become the perpetually advantaged because they keep getting these contracts from the SOEs. It is a toxic place to be in, Thanda, and invariably it's poor people who suffer.
Most definitely. Eskom's failure, it was a big topic on Eskom has been the Reuters. I don't know if you covered that.
That's right, yes, extensively.
His interview. So a big problem of what's happening in Eskom, in my view, is that in the last few years, there has been a lot of sabotage. I believe that. I believe that there has been a lot of sabotage because there's been people who are determined to get out of office a CEO or executive that wants to clamp down on corruption. So they've deliberately been sabotaging it to ensure that he's viewed as incompetent and is eventually pushed out. A CEO who looks the other way on the corruption. We will very soon see our load shedding stages go way down, and we will wonder what the problem is, because actually Eskom has enough capacity to provide electricity for South Africa, more than enough for the current demand that we have. But there's just some shenanigans going on in there, and people are, benefiting out of those diesel contracts, hugely, and obviously benefiting from trying to make sure that there's no headway made in figuring out all the corruption networks that have been built around, Eskom. So, yeah, it's a huge thing.
I mean, it became patently obvious when Uti Reiter in that same interview actually said he was surprised. He said that state security agents, the spies, the spooks, were all over Eskom, keeping an eye on him and his executive, but not actually going after the various individuals, which De Reiter openly says he had reported to SAPS, he had reported to the minister, who later implicated himself, Pravin Gordhan. He was the previous week's Mumish of the week. And of course, he had reported to the president to say, guys, they are violent syndicates who have taken over Eskom effectively, so that I, as the executive and my executive team, are not really the people in charge of Eskom. There are people, he says, 4 syndicates now that we've been told by an investigative piece by Daily Maverick, who effectively run the coal supply chain, if you will, infiltrating Eskom, buying certain officials, shooting and killing certain officials who are getting in the way of these contracts. There are employees at Eskom, guys, who are wearing bulletproof vests in order to go to work. There is a massive problem by having Eskom remain a single provider of electricity, and by extension, a single point of failure. And that decision is a decision made by the politicians. This is why I'm saying the criminal elites that have taken over and the political elites are one thing when it comes to Eskom, and it's their ideology as politicians that is getting in the way. An ideology that suggests that government must provide these services versus opening it up to the private sector, government retaining, let's say, transmission, right? The management of power lines and the like, but the actual generation of electricity, come one, come all. Are you a private company who wants to invest in a coal-powered power plant? Come one, come all. Do you want to burn gas? The bountiful, God has given us bountiful amounts of gas in the southern African coastline, from Mozambique to Mossel Bay. Come one, come all. If you want to create a gas-burning power plant. Do you want to be a hippie and provide the electricity from the sun and blah, blah, blah? Come one, come all, come all. That should be the policy that determines electricity provision in this country, but it isn't, because the politicians get in the way. But as I said, speaking about everything being dependent on politicians, I must move us on, Thanda, because I'm mindful of time, and I'm going to ask you to indulge me with another 15 minutes so we can wrap up these last 2 topics. Speaking about being dependent on politicians, here you now have South African media waiting on tenterhooks. When will the president announce his cabinet reshuffle? Who's going to be the minister of this, the minister of that? I want to open up this quick piece here by News 24, because the latest on this issue, you'll remember the announcement should have been done on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, or Friday rather. The president's spokesperson, one Artikeleba, or one of his spokespersons, then says, oh no, the president's sick, he's not going to speak. And then the president's been busted over this weekend being at a private function, a shindig for Ankole cows and the like. So the mainstream media been making a song and dance about this issue, which I think then prompted the presidency to announce that tomorrow, Monday at 7 p.m., the president will announce his new cabinet. That's the latest, of course, on this issue. Let me just put that on the screen. Excuse me. There it is. Ramaphosa commits to taking cabinet reshuffle by the horns on Monday night. This is a piece, of course, in News 24, citing how President Cyril Ramaphosa will announce the long-awaited changes to his cabinet on Monday. This being announced, of course, by the spokesperson, one Vincent Magwenya, during a media briefing tonight on Sunday. President Ramaphosa, as I mentioned, announcing this tomorrow. The spokesperson directly saying that the president will announce the new national executive tomorrow on Monday at 7 p.m. Magwenya saying that Ramaphosa was still nursing a cold, we're told. The president was busy finalizing the formation of the exec. Now, I'm hoping this article will go into some of the proposed changes. If it doesn't, that's fine. I can speak to them without going into this article. Okay, it doesn't. That's fine. Okay, Thanda, let me come back to you because quite a few changes being touted in this one, of course, stemming from that recent ANC elective conference that saw a few changes there too. For instance, Paul Mashatile now being voted in as the deputy president of the ANC, replacing the former DP, the cat, David Mabaso. David Mabaso himself now having resigned, as the deputy president of the country, presumably to make way for Mashatile. That's one big change. Of course, the last State of the Nation address indicating that a new position in the government will also be created, one Ministry of Electricity, that asinine position, but also an individual touted for that. I can't think of his name. I can remember his nickname, Uspukla, who used to be the mayor of Tshwane. He's touted for that position.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Koketso Ramaphosa, I think.
There it is. And then last position, of course, is the current Minister of Transport, one useless Figile Mbalula, because the position he got elected to is a full-time ANC position. He's now resigning as Minister of Transport. Obviously, that'll open up the door. And of course, the last one I spoke of this previous week is lots of talk around the asshat Police Minister Ubheki being moved from Police Minister, and he's being touted as being the new Minister of State Security or Intelligence Services in this country. That's Ubheki. That is a laughable one if you've heard any other this week. Your thoughts on this cabinet reshuffle?
Someone said it best in the comment section. It's a nothing burger. That a lot of cabinet reshuffles in South Africa, and I can't remember a cabinet reshuffle that made any impact, so that made a difference. Already, this cabinet reshuffle is touted to give us an extra minister. You'll remember that when Cyril was first elected as president, replacing Jacob Zuma, there was a big hope that he may trim the cabinet, and that was kind of the big topic, that he will finally trim it, and he'll finally have just essential people in there. Of course, he's grown the cabinet. The DA came out with a report this week that there's something like 624 staff or something in cabinet. So essentially what it is that the ANC elects an NEC at every elective conference, and basically in order to have power within that NEC, an ANC president needs to make sure that as many of them as possible are given ministerial or deputy ministerial positions, and that's literally what cabinet reshuffles are all about. So you may see some people like Lindiwe Sisulu, who have missed out on the NEC losing their position. It's not because she was, it's because she's now no longer in there. She needs to make way for somebody else who has been elected within the ANC, who now needs to be able to enjoy the fruits of the pie. So it's that's literally all it's about. It's got really nothing to do with our concerns, or it's got nothing to do with who's performing efficiently or not efficiently. It's entirely political. It's entirely about positioning within positioning within the ANC and consolidating power for the president and those who came into power with him.
And what really annoys me, and this will be my final word on this before we move on. What really annoys me, Thanda, is that we have a gaggle of politicians in this country who are not mindful of their patriotic duty to protect the life, liberty, and property rights of South Africans. We have a gaggle of politicians who, even as the international headwinds gather, the likes of the World Economic Forum, these globalist individuals who basically have not our interests in mind, who are trying to reassert an almost communist agenda. And again, even as I say this, I know there'll be people rolling their eyes in the comment section, but it really is what they're trying to do. A almost perverted new world that they're trying to instill via these global type institutions, you would expect that South Africa has the kinds of political leaders who will look after South Africans, not only from those international headwinds, but from also domestic threats that we face. You would expect that that would be the imperative that a character like Ramaphosa uses to decide on who is in his team as a cabinet. But no, as you point out, rather it's individuals who he needs to butter up with because of their political clout within the ANC. And it's individuals who are not there on issues of competence, because that cabinet keeps being bloated and gets bigger and bigger, but seemingly it becomes more, what's the word? Sterile in its ability to make actual decisions. Your word on this before we move on?
Yeah, definitely. It's obviously it's completely broken. The system is completely broken. It has a complete disconnect. There's a complete disconnect between the incentives that the politicians have and how they're incentivized to act, via the structure that we have, where basically they are protected so long as they're within the party. The party is selected, and so long as they have positioned themselves within the party, whether it's by exchanging money, whether it's by shooting one another, all these deaths that happen. However, it's about distributing the spoils. We are the spoils. Our taxes are the spoils that they distribute amongst themselves via cabinet positions. Then from those cabinet positions, they then distribute it via tenders, to each other as well. They can direct the tenders, accordingly. They can protect each other accordingly. Who are we going to send to the police to be the police minister so that he can protect the rest of us, from that? Who's going to be the Minister of Justice that can protect us well? So that's really all that's happening. It's a system that's completely broken. It needs to be redone some way, somehow. South African citizens, unfortunately, there's a low education level in South Africa, not a general education level so much. There is obviously the issues there, but the big thing is a big lack of political understanding to understand, what these guys are doing and how they are not actually serving their interests, and also maybe economic understanding, a lack of economic understanding. So they think giving grants is a good solution when it's actually not a good solution for them, that sort of thing. So it's a completely broken thing, and that's why the politicians are literally, it's like when we talk amongst ourselves as South Africans, when we talk on social media, when we talk in the workplace, you can see that we really understand that the country is at a precipice. When you hear these politicians talk, it's like there's no problem. There's not, life is good, life is flowing. They make stupid remarks. They sound arrogant when they speak. So you can really tell that we live in a completely different world from the world that they live.
Absolutely right. Let me take a moment because I have to move us on. We are completely out of time, and I want us to cover this last story because it speaks to the effects, if you will, of the absolute shambolic state of our politics and the ideas that stems from our politics insofar as what our society now looks like. Our society reflects the poor ideas that come from our politicians, and their policies. And one such consequence is the mushrooming, the explosion of informal settlements and shacks in this country, not just in some key metros, but across the country. It's becoming a massive problem, both on an ecological sense, in a safety and security sense, and of course in a resource allocation sense for a municipality. And at the heart of it is what exactly? It's the ANC. Its failure to uphold and enforce the rule of law, and to enforce the law on protecting property rights. The idea that you can't just come and build wherever you want, that this should be done in a structured and indeed legal manner. And because of that failure, we're seeing this behavior. Now, why is this topic so topical for me? Topical anyway. On Friday's edition of Vuganazo, that's episode 126, I showed you a video that went viral on social media of an informal settlement right by the sea. And many people saying, that's not here in South Africa, that's not in Durban. We don't have areas like that. Have a look at this video. Just give me a second as I load it. As I was saying, even as I load it, dear viewer, please hit that like button. We're in the last, let's call it 8 minutes of the show. And I'm saying that having already asked my guests to give me an extra 15. But the last 8 minutes or so we can just wrap up this last topic. Because I know it's something that affects you too. Let's see here. I'm hoping this is it. This, of course, is from the latest episode of Vuganazo. No, I'm actually showing you tomorrow's episode of Vuganazo. My bad. There you go. You just got a sneak peek there. If you are a fan of my morning news analysis show, let's go back. Why is this happening? There it is. Apologies, viewers. This should be the right one. Now, even as I'm scrolling to the right section here, as I'm mindful of watching myself on screen, no, there it is. I'm just going to play this segment that I did, and I'll let you guys be the judge. We'll speak on it, Thanda, in a second. No, too far back. There. Enforcement of the law in order to protect South Africans. All right, after that story, I take you now to Durban, or wait a minute now. Is it Durban though? Because indeed, in this story, a certain video went viral and people were asking themselves the question, is this in Durban? Have a look at this.
There you go. Some people, lucky people.
Yes, that absolute pigsty of an area. And I'm sorry to use that expression because I'm very mindful of the fact that human beings live there. But this is the problem with South Africa. We allow these situations to fester simply because those who are in power, namely the ANC, and because of their ideology, refuse to protect property rights. That is what happens when you refuse to protect property rights. More on that in a second. Let me just confirm something for you. Yes, that is in Durban. It is in the Ispingo area and it's called the Dakota Informal Settlement. Let me quickly read this piece in The Witness, which recently tracked this particular story, given how shocked a lot of Durbanites even were at the state of things. Many Durbanites not even knowing that a place like that exists. And why? Because often we associate those sort of images of shacks who are piled upon each other, trash strewn everywhere, with other parts of Africa. That is a luxury, in inverted commas, that we South Africans used to hold, where we thought, oh no, we would never turn out to be like those countries, we said to ourselves, because we've got the rule of law. Well, we clearly don't. And that's what happens when you allow lawlessness like this and a disrespect for property rights to fester. You have places develop that look like somewhere in Liberia, Monrovia, for example, that has scenes almost reminiscent of this. But nonetheless, as I said, this Witness piece citing the following. One of the most alarming is the I just wanted to play that segment, Thanda, because again, it really sets out that video you saw of Dakota informal settlements by the ocean in Ispingo Beach, which used to be a pristine, wonderful beach, one which, when I was a child, living in Mlazi, we used to go to Ispingo Beach, to revel and swim in the ocean. Clearly, you're unable to do that now, as you saw in that image. But at the heart of it, Thanda, this is where I wanted us to chat. It's that failure by the ANC government and indeed governments across the country to respect property rights.
Yeah, definitely. I think to be able for the ANC to be able to respect property rights and to be able to take a hard stand on the developments of these informal settlements, they need the moral authority to be able to do that. And unfortunately, they lack the moral authority to be able to take those hard decisions to say, you can't build here, go away. Obviously, of course, there's also the issue of our courts, which might turn around and say, no, actually, you can't just chase people away. But anyway, what do I mean by the lack of moral authority? The lack of moral authority being these people who are here in these informal settlements, they're much more comfortable places that they're probably they're from and would like to be living in, which is maybe some rural area somewhere in northern KwaZulu-Natal or southern parts of KwaZulu-Natal. But there's been no development. That's what I was getting at when we were talking about electricity before. There's been no development in these areas. South Africa is shrinking. It's geographically shrinking even as our population continues to rise. And what do I mean by that? The areas of South Africa that have economic activity are shrinking. Towns are becoming, towns that, used to kind of, be going, you drive past them, they've become ghost towns. They are falling into ruin. Rural areas are becoming depopulated. My own Efasbanki, near Ladysmith. It's just my two grandmothers who are there. My grandfather had 9 wives, so those are the two of the wives that are left there. And so it's grandmothers, some other ladies that are there. There's just one man who's there, who's there. People have left. You can't be economically active in these places. So it's a huge place where I could be living there, my family could be living, we all could be living there, but we can't because there's nothing there. There's no opportunities. There's no developments. There's no industry. So South Africa is shrinking. It's geographically shrinking in terms of where there are areas where actually there's economic activity versus the size of the population that's increasing, and that's becoming reflected in things like people rushing into the city, hijacking buildings. In Joburg, you've got the issue of hijacked buildings. In Durban as well, Berea area. We went to school in Berea. Beautiful area, lovely area. You probably thought to yourself, man, one day I might live here, I might live in Morningside, might live in Glenwood. Absolutely become a crime den, of an area. And it's just these cities cannot hold these numbers. It has to collapse. Even as great as Cape Town is touted to be, informal settlements there as well, mushrooming. Kaya Licha is also, Nyanga crime den. I've seen some, there's shocking stats coming out of there. So there's no municipality that can handle, no metros, because everybody's going to these metros. There's no metro that can handle these numbers that are coming to them. And of course, it's not just South Africans. You've also got people from other countries as well coming in. But even if it wasn't for those people from other countries, South Africa is shrinking and it needs to be expanding. There needs to be development. There needs to be, sometimes we talk about, government they got this much revenue from SARS, so they shouldn't spend more than that because they've got debt or whatever the case may be. We actually need to be spending more, and maybe though we need to be spending it better, obviously, but we need to be spending more in the right areas. We need to be spending more to expand South Africa. There needs to be a huge amount of development where we are. But what happened is the ANC strategy coming into 1994 was to say, we're going to do the bare minimum. The easiest thing that we're going to do is, instead of developing these areas where our people are, we're to the cities. That was the strategy. The past laws are gone. We will no longer, we're no longer going to keep you out like you used to be kept out before. So come to Johannesburg, come to Durban, come to Pietermaritzburg, come to Cape Town, come to Port Elizabeth. Just come to these places. We're not going to bother developing the places where you are. Just come here, and those municipalities will deal with it somehow. And it was never going to work. And we are now seeing the results of that strategy failing. So it's really, South Africa is on a very slippery slope, because if these metros fail, because that's all we've got left now. If these metros fail, and I'm in a metro right now that to me looks like it's failing. I'm in Pretoria, and the streets, of Pretoria are absolutely dire. If these metros fail, basically South Africa is finished, because the small towns, the small municipalities have already collapsed, and so if the metros fail,
and this is where it gets depressing, because I'm just seeing a comment here by Helen saying South Africa is a slumland. And unfortunately, that is reflecting itself in what we're seeing around us as South Africans. And it shouldn't be the case. Ula Solis, one of the other commenters, put a comment on screen here saying there's an elegant solution as to how we fix this. Him basically suggesting that, we should be building flats, and in these flats, in other words, urban density. And in this urban density, you can then give someone who was in a shack a flat with a title deed. I don't necessarily 100% agree with that. I think there's a middle ground between your point, Tanda, and your comment by Ola Solis, which is actually development in our rural areas is critically needed. The sort of development that actually allows someone who lives in Mapumulo, where my farm is, to stay in the area, maybe farm in the area, or start a small agribusiness in the area, create jobs, create wealth, the very sort of wealth that creates a middle class in rural South Africa. We're neglecting to do this, and then we're surprised that people are moving to cities, as you rightly pointed out. It should be a source of indictment, and someone would leave, a maybe small holding of 2 or 3 hectares in a rural area to live in a shack on a sand dune in Cape Town, or a shack on a sand dune in Durban, as is the case in this video. And why? This happens because we have a government that fails on the policy front, both in terms of preventing that individual who lives in a rural area from creating economic opportunity for themselves to raise the living standards in our rural areas, and simultaneously fails to enforce the law when an unintended consequence of that starts cropping up in our metros across the country. And by the way, the unintended consequences are absolutely dire. A lot of these informal settlements are not just individuals or individual families of people building shacks to live there. No. They are now almost warlord type characters. In that episode of Vuganazo, I called them shack lords, of these sort of criminal elite individuals who purposefully invade pieces of land, build shacks there, invite people off of a false promise that, there'll be housing down the line, but for now, rent the shack from me. There are people who have very extensive, almost, I find it weird using this expression, property portfolios of shacks, where they're renting out these shacks at a healthy profit. And guess what? They're often hiding behind a political imperative. So the EFF types are characters who you're seeing do this a lot at the moment, where they invite people to invade land in this country to live there off of the false promise that the state will deliver housing down the line. All of these instances are a failure of law enforcement and, more importantly, a disrespect of property rights in this country. So how do we fix this? Tanda, let's end here on this point. How do we fix this? My solution would be to straddle both the points Tanda made and some of the comments we saw here. Absolutely. Rural development is critically important, and that isn't a function of the state necessarily. It's a function of the state getting out of the way and giving the resources to communities in order to create value in their own areas. That is a very tough sell in a country that believes politicians and the state should do everything. And equally, where the state does have a role, is in our metro areas, in our urban areas, where it has to enforce the damn law. It's got to enforce the damn law. I know it doesn't look politically nice for people sort of, being moved with court orders from land that they've invaded, but it absolutely has to happen. And that old system, I call it old, but it's just a rational system of town planning needs to take priority again, where if there is a parchment of land, a municipality has to plan for residents moving in there, build the roads, build the sewage infrastructure, mark out plots for people to build on, put in electricity before people settle there, water, social services, a police station, fire station, the likes, all of these things that do not happen when you just allow an informal settlement to develop, where people build on top of each other, refuse removal, for example. You saw in that particular video I played of people just dumping now right on the ocean front by the seaside. And how you do this is the state taking responsibility for enforcing the law on property rights. You cannot build a free, prosperous, non-racial, and property-owning society if the state does not play that role. You've got to have a government that takes this seriously. Thanda, your final word on this, and then we wrap up.
Yeah. 100%. Me, I'm much stronger on the first point of saying develop the rural areas, bring industry to the rural areas, get factories going in the rural areas, get jobs for young people in the rural areas. A rural young man mustn't dream of going to Durban or dream of going to Johannesburg. He must see opportunities in his own area where he would be able to work. I love this topic because it's really summarizing everything that we've been discussing, because he mustn't dream of having to go to varsity, to those few varsities we have in South Africa, and think that's the only way that he can make it. There should be a factory in his area and business and economic activity in his area that he can get involved in, even if he only finished in grade 9, and he can go and get a skill and become an artisan or become a boiler maker, whatever the case may be. That's what should be happening in these areas. And we need to, repopulate them. And importantly, Sihle, our people own land in these areas. And if you understand something about land and how land gets its value, land gets its value from how much economic activity and it happens in that area where there is land, and how much people want to live there. So actually, if our government was interested in empowering, Black people and empowering them economically, it would be an absolute priority to say we've got to make sure that the areas that they live in, where they own land, where I have there, my grandfather, the 65 hectare plot of land there. That there's economic activity around there, so that land can be valuable, so that they can then use that land to mortgage and start a business, or mortgage and create something. You understand? That's actually how you bring wealth to people. But by making them depopulate their own areas to go and go into the city, ultimately, whoever owned land in Durban, whoever owned land in Cape Town or Pretoria is just going to get richer, because their land is going to be more valuable as there is more demand for his land. And the land that they had is going to lose its value, because the demand for that land is going to decrease. ANC have been short-sighted, and they've literally impoverished the people that they were supposed to help in the first place.
We could talk all night about this topic, and maybe it's something which we'll pick up again. I might even come to you on it, because I'm going to be shooting an episode on this particular issue. And I'm going to speak, Thanda, to the people who live in these informal settlements, because often we also don't hear from them. These people live in conditions which they don't want to live in, but again, they do because of the failure of the state to enforce property rights. Both the stick and the carrot side of it. The carrot being, as we've just discussed here, some of these solutions, but also the stick. The idea that you can't just rock up to an area, take it over and build a shack there. A toxic narrative, Thanda, that is somehow popular in our leftist politics. You hear these politicians often say, give us the land. We'll build our homes here, and we'll take over the farms and blah, blah, blah. You cannot build value by a toxic ideology like that. You need to encourage people to see themselves as developers of land. If I come to an area, I must be there to add value to it. And if that means the state giving me some resources, so be it. But alternatively, us as communities, pooling resources and doing things for ourselves. It's a full conversation. We've run out of time. Thanda, as we conclude, how do the folks get in touch with you, Putwami, as your final word?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, ThandaM2, so they can come to me there where I share my views on politics, social, issues as well. So yeah, that's where they can get me.
Excellento. Puti, thank you so much for your time. And that is, of course, Thandaxolo Mabaso, good friend of mine, someone who I've known technically since we were prepubescent children at primary school. But yeah, someone who I really respect on some of the views that he has. And thank you to him for joining. And thank you, dear viewer, for having been a part of tonight's show. Unfortunately, none of you came through on camera to give your views. Would have been nice if we had that. But nonetheless, muchas gracias to everybody. Remember, please, on your way out, guys, please do me that favor. I know I always harp on about it, but hit that like button. It costs you nothing. Hit that like button, and as you do, please share the stream so that more people get to watch it. And if you're watching on YouTube, hey, subscribe. Join the over 41,000 now. Amazing numbers, guys. I think I had 37,000 at the beginning of January, and I'm now sitting at 41,000 people. Thank you so much to every single one of you. I will continue working hard, pumping out the content that you clearly like. Please help me do that by being someone who contributes to the show financially. Anything between 50 to 100 Rand a month, guys. You don't have to do big contribution, just 50 to 100 Rand a month. My average is about 75 Rand per month. What does that money do? So, because a lot of people were wondering, what do I do with this money? Am I Scrooge McDuck putting it into a room and I swim in it? Firstly, there's nowhere near that kind of money. And how this money is used is it pays for the diesel, it pays for the cameraman, and at times the security I need when I shoot my specials. For example, the next special, as I just mentioned, will be going into our informal settlements, talking to those people and asking them, why are you there? And what brings you there? And how can we improve your life? So that special we're busy planning at the moment, and we're going to shoot it. And there are a few others that we're also planning in the campaign. Woo, guys, lots that we're busy planning at the same time. Lots of moving parts, but I need you to support me. Now, with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow bright and early from 7 a.m. for Vuga Nazo. You got a snippet of that episode tonight by accident, but nonetheless, visit me, please, on my website at bigdaddyliberty.com. That's where you'll find all information about me, including a payment method that suits you. With that being said, as I said, thank you once again. And yeah, tomorrow, bright and early. And as I always say at the end of every episode, never trust a commie.